Hey everybody, welcome to the Wellman's Podcast. I'm really excited today because I have a very good friend of mine, believe it or not, that is an internationally acclaimed pianist and teacher, Barbara Lister-Sink. She is a graduate of Smith College and holds the coveted Prix d'Excellence from the Utrecht Conservatory and a Doctor of Education from Columbia University. She's a former member of the Artists Faculty of the Eastman School of Music. She has collaborated with some of the world's most renowned performers, composers, and in numerous music festivals throughout North America, Europe, and in Australia. Formerly keyboardist for the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra of Amsterdam, she also taught on the piano faculties of the Amsterdam Music Lyceum, Duke University, and the Brevard Music Center, and is currently artistic director of the Salem College School of Music and directs America's first graduate certificate program and master music in performance and pedagogy with an emphasis in injury-preventive keyboard technique. Dr. Barbara Lister-Sink is acknowledged as a global leader in injury-preventive keyboard technique. Her video, DVD, Freeing the Cage Bird, developed in well-coordinated injury-preventive piano technique, won the distinguished 2002 Music Teachers National Association Francis Clark Keyboard Pedagogy Award and was praised as a monumental work by pianist Vladimir Ashkenazy. She is a frequent presenter at national and international conferences, including the Music Teachers National Association and the International Society of Music Educators in Glasgow, Scotland, and the 2020 virtual ISME conference from Helsinki, Finland. Through her research, validated Lister-Sink method, 2016 TED Talk X talk, hundreds of workshops at universities, conservatories, summer institutes, and professional conferences, and frequent articles in music journals, Lister-Sink has helped thousands of keyboardists from around the world remove technical obstacles to their musical development. A Steinway artist since 1977 and a previewer for Oxford University Press, Lister-Sink was recently invited to write a series of articles for the European Piano Teachers Association Piano Journal. She was chosen by Musical Americas Global as one of the America's top professionals of 2018, who have contributed to the music profession as innovators, independent thinkers, and visionary leaders. Lister-Sink is a native of North Carolina and is also a visual artist in her spare time, and is also a very good friend of mine and also a fellow workout partner and also my fellow philosopher. So we have long walks, philosophy talks. Check her out. Thank you so much, Barbara, for being on.
Oh, I'm honored. I'm delighted and really honored.
Thanks. Well, so Brian and I, we deal with a lot of people coming into, our clinics with injuries. I mean, that's pretty much what we do. I do a lot of acupuncture. We have some mutual clients, me and you, and Brian, that's his forte, being a doctor of physical therapy. So I'm thrilled to have you on. And I guess I just want to get started. When people say pianist injuries, I get the thought that, well, why and how do pianists get injured? And is it a large segment of the population of pianists that do get injured?
Well, there are in China alone around 40 million people studying piano. And in the United States, it's about 23, I think it's somewhere around 23 million amateur pianists. And the piano has such a mystique, it still does. It's kind of a romantic instrument, and it's also, and one of its problems is it's so accessible. Anybody can produce a sound on it, unlike, say, the violin or the oboe or the clarinet. You have to work at that. But a piano is just sitting there. There are not as many sitting in your parlor, so to speak, as there used to be. There used to be a huge amount of instruments, even at the turn of the last century. But now, the sales of actual acoustic pianos, we call it, the kind your grandmother or your great-grandmother used to have, uprights, they're down. So, but we still have keyboards. We still have digital keyboards. A lot of people have those Casios, you know, everybody gets them for Christmas or whatever.
Right.
And everybody just kind of likes to go to a piano or a keyboard, musical keyboard, and start pushing the keys down. So and one of the reasons it's so popular is that you can be the soloist and the accompanist. You know, if you're playing
Right.
a solo instrument, you don't have the harmony underneath it. And if you're listening to somebody sing your favorite Lady Gaga tune or whatever, people forget that they actually have harmony underneath it. And that's that harmony, those chords, you know, that are there, they're what give you the emotional kick. The melody's beautiful. That's sort of like the speech of the human. But so the piano is accessible, incredibly accessible. So anybody can push the keys down to make some sort of sound. And it's sort of universally beloved because you get a lot of emotional kick from it because you get the melody and the harmony and
Yeah.
all that. So that's one of the reasons, I mean, that it's so popular and that everybody plays it. Plus, if you listen to any band or any of your favorite people, you know, or Taylor Swift, whatever, she's playing the piano, you know.
Right.
So it's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's more than you might think, you know. So
Right.
that's one of the reasons we have so many people playing it. But then, you know, I can tell you why. At least my theory about why we have so much injury too. If you want to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, it seems to me that an expert pianist is spending a lot of hours there at the piano, right? I mean, putting a lot of work in. And
I figured as a little farm kid in North Carolina growing up, I still was practicing an hour as a little kid. I started at 4. And so probably I was practicing an hour up until I was, I don't know, 12 or 13. And then I bet I increased it when I started studying with a college teacher at Salem College in
yeah,
Winston-Salem. I think I increased it probably to 2 a day. So I counted it up. You could, you know, a really serious little geeky piano kid like me would be practicing between, you know, 3,000, 5,000 hours before we even got to college. And once you get to college, then, you know, it has to be like 4 hours a day if you're a
right.
serious piano major. So we're talking tens of thousands of hours. Even before most people choose a major, we've practiced thousands of hours. And
Yeah,
that's repetitive motion. Yeah, it's all repetitive motion.
yeah, you got to be thinking about millions of finger flexions and wrist movements over and over and over. That's
Well, you know, Brian, the problem is we don't think about those because most pianists, including me, go into piano because we are musicians and we love the emotional kick we get when we put those sounds together. It's just beautiful and it stirs our heart. We love it. Most of us love what we call the 19th century romantic music, at the, you know, Chopin and all of that. In classical pianists I'm talking about, but most people do too. I mean, Billy Joel, you know, he had a classical training. A lot of them do. Tori Amos went to conservatory. So we love that romantic, sort of beautiful stuff that stirs our hearts. And we don't go into it because we love athletics. I did. I came from an athletic family. So I kind of like the whole physical thing. That's probably why I did what I did. But
Hmm.
most people who go into it, they go into playing the piano because they love the emotional high you get from it. And the, you know, basic form that we teach in athletics, that ain't there. You know, it's just sort of, I can give you a quick example. Last night I was preparing for a recording I'm making of the work of Charles Vardell. He was a former dean of the School of Music at Salem College. And I'm recording all his solo works in a couple weeks. And was I following my own advice? No. I was playing through, you know, I wanted to get the emotional kick of playing, you know, 3 minutes of romantic type piano music. And I felt myself, my traps were getting tight in my arm. I was feeling weird. I was accumulating some tension in my forearms, you know, and I thought, you crazy woman, you know, you're the one that's trying to tell everybody you can't do this. You've got to listen to your body.
Right.
Pianists don't do that. We listen to the music and are moved by it. But
Right. And you're spending tens of thousands of hours, especially at the expert level, in
right,
what seems to be one position,
yeah,
right? Like
right,
like kind of bent over or stooped over a piano, it seems. And
Right.
What does that do to the posture? What does that do to the musculoskeletal system over time and the nervous system?
Over time, well, what I started with was just plain old garden variety tendonitis in my extensors, my forearm muscles, because of this constant movement. And this is not how I would play now, but this constant movement of the fingers up and down, sort of co-contracting with your extensors and your flexors. And I kept doing that and doing that and doing that because a lot of what we play is really, really fast, and it's repetitive motion, of course. And so after a while, it usually starts, in my experience, just my anecdotal experience with these pianists, and now I'd say hundreds and, well, no, thousands of pianists, but I've trained hundreds and hundreds. So it'll start with tendonitis, probably. And then it just kind of moves into, it can move into carpal tunnel syndrome, to Quervain syndrome, medial lateral epicondylitis, and eventually it goes into thoracic outlet syndrome.
Yeah.
Sometimes it starts with that. Compression in the cervical spine, especially because of the really poor posture. You know, we're breaking all the rules of good biomechanics. So we're compressing the spine. We're basically messing up the central nervous system. And then it can go into much more serious things like focal dystonia, which is sort of the king of injuries or disorders. It's, as you know, it's a neurological disorder. It's when we have repeated, the main theory right now in the research is that when we've repeated and repeated and repeated a certain motion on the motor cortex, we have fired those signals so much, rapidly and constantly, and lots of them, because we're using in that area. If your technique is poor, and if you don't have rest, and you don't break, and you don't stop those signals. In other words, if you burn all the lights all the time, turn on all your appliances and computer and everything, you're going to have a short circuit. And so eventually then, and I've retrained, I'd say half a dozen people with this disorder. The fingers will just start sticking out when they're facing the piano. That's why it's called focal dystonia. It's just related to the piano, to their piano playing. And so the brain recognizes that program, and then everything starts firing, and they're totally out of control. It's an involuntary, spasmodic kind of spasm of the fingers. They'll just suddenly start sticking out or curling in ways that are totally beyond the control of a voluntary muscle. And I tell you, it's one of the hardest things to retrain.
I would think so. I mean, to try to get somebody back to normal playing and get rid of that dystonia, I mean, that sounds like it'd be so disheartening, and for the practitioner, like, you know, they've lost their passion after a while. Like, it would be real. I just think it'd be so anxiety producing and depressing for somebody that feels like they don't have control after playing so beautifully for so long.
Oh, it's devastating. In fact, I printed out a couple of, I wanted to read this to you guys, because this is what fuels me, what gets me up in the morning is, I mean, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be either a chicken farmer when I grew up, or I wanted to be like Albert Schweitzer.
Okay.
And so, I mean, he loved chickens too, I guess. But so Albert Schweitzer, you know, he was a musician. He was an organist, first rate, great J.S. Bach scholar, and was a great organist and also a doctor, and went to Africa to set up hospitals, and he was a healer. And I loved all of those things. I mean, I loved, you know, J.S. Bach. I loved the piano and the organ, and I wanted to be a doctor. But back when I was growing up, women didn't become doctors, you know. So, and I was already on the track to be a pianist. So anyhow, I always wanted to be a healer and help people that way. So it was be like Schweitzer. So this is what fuels me, and I've collected these over the years. One of them said, this is a young woman, like 26. I felt as if I were being punished for pursuing my love and passion. I felt imprisoned in my own body, not able to express myself. Since music is at the core of my soul, I felt that there was no purpose for me to live any longer.
Yeah.
It's not only do you have the pain ongoing, and like you said, Keoni, the out of controlness, which is devastating. And not only can you not speak your heart, the music is our voice. If we don't have music, we're almost negated, we feel.
Right.
I'm first and foremost not a woman, not a North Carolinian, not a mother, not any of that. I am a musician. That's the first identity. We're born with it. It's genetic. So if you lose that voice, you lose your soul.
Right.
And so I've had some students on suicide watch. We're very lucky. We've developed at Salem this beautiful community of supportive, respectful, lovely people. These are all really great people, my students, and the faculty that work with us, and you, Keoni. I mean, you're healthcare providers. We're really lucky, but we have to get a really supportive community that's respectful and where they don't feel like they are being called hypochondriacs or anything like that. That's another one of the problems. They look in vain for a proper diagnosis and treatment because it becomes very multifaceted, and then they develop emotional problems. Who wouldn't? If you lose your scholarship, you lose your place in line at the university, you have to leave your program, the doctorate. Nobody will ask you to be in a chamber ensemble or accompany you anymore, or them anymore. Then you have the financial loss because you lose your church job, you can't play, or you're worried because you're in a university setting where you're coming up for tenure and you can't play those recitals because you hurt so much that there's no way you can play and you can't tell anybody. So I've had to work, obviously, like you all do, confidentially. Obviously, it's all confidential. I don't name names unless somebody.
Right.
But then I had another one. I'll just read you one more. This was a 30-year-old doctoral student. Maybe she's 35. I've been playing the piano for about 30 years. See, most of us start in our 4 or 5. Most of my life, I'm in constant pain. The pain feels like a punishment for playing the piano. That word keeps coming up. People do not talk about it. They think it's part of being a musician. I have been very depressed, and I thought about ending my life almost every day.
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
Yeah. It's tragic, is what
it's tragic because especially if these people can be trained, especially early on, right? So they don't get to the place where they're getting the focal dystonia or anything like that, where they're trained to play with proper posture or appropriate rest, or I mean, these are artistic athletes. I've heard you use that word before, and they definitely are. Maybe train in a way where they actually are more focused on not so much the artistry, but maybe exercising the whole body in a sense, and then getting in front of the piano or whatever to help to prevent that stuff.
Well, there's more and more of that. A little bit of the history of the whole thing. Actually, there were a lot of people interested. I've got this great book called Famous Pianists and Their Technique. It's fantastic. Reginald Garrick was a dear friend of mine, and it's exhaustive. I mean, he went into the whole history for 250 years. And believe it or not, like in the early 19th century, people were really into, they didn't call it good biomechanics, but proper posture and flexible wrist. I mean, there's certain key words that keep coming up that made you realize that they did not believe in accumulating muscle tension, or what I call it, stressing the neuromusculoskeletal system in any way. They were trying to prevent that. And so then they had, in the middle of the 19th century, this Stuttgart school, it was called, of high fingers and co-contraction, which was ruinous. And then people like Chopin and Liszt, these are big, heavy hitters in the piano world, as composers and also as pianists. They were phenomenal. They were like sort of the rock stars of the 19th century. But they were debunking that. They were putting that down. They're saying, you can't do that. You have to be flexible. You have to, use your muscles well. However they would put it in 19th century German or French form. So, but then in the late 19th century, the great Russian school with Poles and some Germans came together and developed this unbelievable way of playing where nobody got injured and people could play virtuoso, fast, loud, continuous, perpetual motion. And that was, if anybody listening knows the name Van Cliburn, he was like a rock star. He won the Moscow competition in the 50s, which was amazing because it was the Cold War. So he was the first American to go over there, and actually he became beloved by the USSR people, the Russians, and developed a great relationship. But he was a product of this old Russian school. Played divinely. If anybody's interested in a great biomechanical model, you might say, great form, Van Cliburn. He was fantastic. He had a ticker tape parade in New York City. I mean, what classical pianist? Well, Lang Lang might have that nowadays. Lang Lang, as much as I do admire his musicianship, he's a phenomenal talent. But his biomechanics, if you look at it just the way Brian would, or you would, Keoni, or a sports coach would, or anybody who studied, I've studied biomechanics in college. Anybody who studies biomechanics would go, whoops, this is not formed to have your neck compressed and your shoulders up all the time and all sorts of other things happening. So then we kind of lost some of that. His upper arms released, and he would just move with ease side to side. It was fantastic playing. He was my great model, and my mom too. But that kind of left, and then we branched off and became individual, like whatever. And one of the reasons I think a lot of people don't want to go into this in a scientific way is they're afraid that, and this was said a lot by some major writers and pedagogues, that science and understanding of science was incompatible with artistry and imagination, that you had to have one or the other.
Right.
That it was a kind of an either or.
Right.
And obviously for me, it's a both and, because everything I do for all of these students and for myself, biomechanically, scientifically informed, is for the most compelling, expressive, fabulous performance possible. I tell my students, your duty is to make people cry for all the best reasons, musically. So that's where it all goes. So it's not incompatible at all, but for some reason, I don't know, lapse of, Keoni, you and I have talked about this, is lapse in critical thinking. I don't get it. So thank God, though, in the 70s, 60s, there's some leaders in this field, but most of them are pedagogues like me. They're teachers who we hang out our shingle. We're autodidacts. We self-teach. We learn things on our own, and whether it's scientifically informed, who knows? I mean, I went back to school and studied biomechanics, movement science, neuroscience, because I wanted to make sure whatever I was saying intuitively was accurate from a scientific viewpoint. So but then the whole field of performing arts medicine started like in the late 70s, 80s. That's a small organization, though, a couple hundred people, and a lot of researchers doing a lot of stuff, but we don't have the billions and multi-billions of dollars that the sports people have,
Right.
But we're making some inroads, and people are working hard, but it's still a hard sell. It's a hard sell, and we're still a 1 in 2 chance of developing an injury. That's the big one.
That's huge.
That's huge. I mean, would you get on a plane?
Yeah, 1 in 2 chance of getting an injury on a plane. No, I would not get on a plane.
A pharmaceutical. Would you take a drug if you had a 1 in 2 chance, or go into an operating room? Well, he's got a pretty good, record. The doctor.
Right.
You got a 1 in 2 chance coming out.
Yeah. Well, and I would think that those numbers would be improved if people actually knew where to go. I mean, I would have, before I met you, I would have no idea where to send a pianist complaining of I don't know, carpal tunnel or whatever. I just wouldn't. Basically, with the medical model, we're just going to treat the carpal tunnel, right? Using the
Right,
current conventional method, steroids,
right.
if that doesn't help, anti-inflammatories, that doesn't help. Well, let's just cut the tendon
Yeah.
there, let's do surgery. And so how do people find you then? Or how do people find somebody who has an expertise in
It's
this?
pure serendipity. And
Really?
now with the
That's
internet,
awful because
yeah, it's
that's
awful. No, of course it's awful. I mean, and that's why recently we did a virtual workshop. I do one every year but very small group of people because we work hands-on with my assistants and many of them we train hands-on because this is like sports, it's not something you read and learn out of a book. You can learn the science out of the book, but it's an incredibly, probably one of the most complex physical activities known to humankind. That's been said, actually. There's some great quotes about that, and that's why we're
yeah,
sort of the darlings of neuroscientists. They like to study it because so much is going on, but it's all, as Brian would know, it's all on small muscles. We use the whole body, but what's really working are fingers, arms, much more, and upper arms too. But we use the fingers a lot. So I won't say most doctors, but as I have a great book that I just love. It's for everybody. Repetitive strain injury, Emile Pasquarelli. And he talks about how incredibly hard it is for anyone with RSI, repetitive strain injury, to get a proper diagnosis. First thing people think is, well, they're just making it up because you can't see it, you can't
right,
really measure it. And for pianists, it really does become multifactorial and multifaceted. I mean, it morphs into all sorts of things. And I can't tell you how many misdiagnoses I have a record of that my students have gotten. And
right.
the best book to read about that is something called How Doctors Think by
Yeah,
Brookman. Wow. And this is right in line with pianist experiences. He had a wrist injury, and so he deliberately set about going to, I think, maybe four or five doctors. Everyone gave him a different diagnosis. And
wow,
finally, he had to figure out what it might be, himself. And he found one doctor he really did trust, that he thought, yeah. One made up something practically. And I'm not dissing the medical profession. I work with them all the time. But we usually, getting the proper diagnosis is one of the most difficult things because it masquerades. You can have myofascial disorder masquerading as a number of other things. You can have pain here in your wrist area, referred pain from your cervical spinal compression or from thoracic outlet syndrome. So I've had people, obviously you can have cysts. Once in a while you get somebody who doesn't respond, who just has an anomalous condition, like a spur or something that's genetic, and they don't respond even when they're retraining well with good biomechanics. They can't do that because they've got a different, they just have an anomalous physical condition. But I would say you're right. I mean, getting the right diagnosis, because most healthcare professionals are not used to working with musicians. There is a field called
right.
performing arts medicine, thank goodness. But one doctor, I was accompanied one of my students years ago, and he just said, "Oh, you pianists, it's just occupational hazard." Well, it is, but it shouldn't be any more than it should be an occupational hazard to lose your ability to, to dance, if you
Right.
know proper biomechanics. But that's what we get a pass. I think that's the biggest thing I want to say. For some reason, here we are as pianists engaged in some of the most complex physical coordinations imaginable,
Oh
and
yeah.
really fast. You can play up to several hundred notes in a minute at least. I mean, I could, if you're playing something like that, or you're doing a lot of them, that's just like hundreds of notes repetitively. And yet, nobody really talks about good biomechanics or basic form for the pianist. That's been
Right.
my thing. That's why when I created that DVD in '96, I called it Developing Well Coordinated injury preventive technique, because nobody talked in terms of good coordination. Some people were. I mean, Mrs. Taubman, there were a number of people I could name, that Dorothy Taubman and Seymour Fink. There are a number in my field now who are working hard at this, but we'd kind of forgotten that whole idea of you know, not that we even had remembered it. I don't know if it was really in our kind of zeitgeist, you know, in our worldview, or Weltanschauung, I guess you'd call it. I think we just never thought we were supposed to look at that athletic side. Now they are more and more, thank goodness, you know. And
Right.
my students are in their 20s and 30s, and I think the race is going to be to those students, because they're rational, they're also highly musical, and they want to get this right as teachers. Because Keoni, you mentioned a while back, you know, you got to get it early. Sure, if you teach basic form, good form to these kids, and they have that neuromuscular program, then chances are, if they understand what they've got and they don't forget it, they will have a long, joyous life in music.
Right.
But man, it's so hard to get the right diagnosis and then the right treatment. I have students that are researching, going all over the country and different other countries, but you know, looking for the top people. My students are such good researchers, this graduate program. I found out about this whole field of hypermobility. I didn't realize what a widespread problem that was with pianists. Brian, do you run into that? A lot of hypermobility?
Yeah, absolutely. It's basically what you're talking about is excessive motion there.
Yeah, they're too loose. In other words, I mean, you can be a lot of people use terms like being loose, or when they look at my student, oh, they look, no, I don't, loose is not what we want. We want good coordination. It's not about loose. We want efficient muscle use, optimal skeletal alignment, those hallmarks of any good, you know, any activity, physical activity. But yeah, too loose. And yet, you look on YouTube and you'll see a lot of little, you know, 8-year-olds playing Beethoven sonatas and stuff, and you see their little hands just stretched out, and they're hyperextending, and they're overloading joints, and they're messing themselves up, and the ligaments are all stretched out. Nobody knows that that's not good, you know.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
absolutely.
sure that makes you cringe, right, when you see
It
that.
makes you, oh, me? Oh, my
Yeah.
students don't even like to go to concerts anymore. I even look on YouTube. And I don't say that in an arrogant way. I just say that in terms of, hey, folks, let's just develop basic form, you know. Let's look at biomechanics. Let's look at those principles of good body use that all the other sports do, you know.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, Barbara, do you have, I know sometimes we talked about it, we're guilty of not taking our own advice, but do you have like a pre-routine for playing, and then a while playing, things that you try and keep in the back of your mind as far as your posture goes, like you've mentioned, and then a post playing thing that you do, like a stretch routine or anything like that, like a warm up like an athlete would do?
That's a really good question. And it comes up a lot because, one, as Keoni knows, I believe in being in good physical shape. That's really important. On the other hand, I've had so much somatic training, and if your listeners don't know what that is, a lot of people do, but you know, that self-sensing, it's like Alexander technique or Feldenkrais technique or Pilates, or, you know, I've had so much of that as I tell my students, our motto is the world is your practice room. So in other words, even before I'm just as I'm talking, I am attuning to my spinal alignment. I'm balancing on my sitting bones. I'm letting my spine have its nice 4 natural curves, and you know, sort of expanding up and down. I've released my neck. I've released my shoulders. My head feels like a helium balloon, not so much like a bowling ball. If it were, you know, forward like that, it's
Right.
more like really light. My upper arms are released. I'm giving you the litany of what we call cue sheet 1. It's before you play. You know,
Okay.
you release your upper arms. I feel gravity. I let the legs relax apart a bit. Feel the floor supporting my feet. It all takes about, for me, when I walk on stage, for instance, it'll take, I don't know, 8 seconds. So I do that, and the big one is watch the breath. So my students are used to observing their breathing, and it becomes very deep and natural, because if their spine's well aligned, they're balanced on the sitting bones, all of that, then they can take really, really healthful breaths. They're breathing in a very healthy way. and the diaphragm expands and all that. So then, but then you ask me, what do I do like during playing? Well, that is an incredibly highly complex thing. And I start just, I follow the rules of the neurobiology of learning a complex skill. We start with the simplest thing, which is like lifting your forearm with your fingers hanging. I mean, that's in the training in the Lister-Sync method. We start away from the piano completely because they're so loaded up with this old program, this complex mess. I refer to a refrigerator. If Keoni came in and wanted to check my nutrition, he'd see the Trader Joe's meringues. They'd have to go. We'd have to get rid of the cookies and that kind of stuff. But I tell people we're going to have to you're going to have to empty everything out of your refrigerator when they retrain with me. I'm different that way. I have a method. I don't just go in with Band-Aid stuff. They start lying on the floor, face up, and start scanning their body, doing a progressive relaxation contraction exercise. And then an Alexander technique person works with them to tune them up kinesthetically so they can sense their body, and so that they can become aware of their muscles, so they can control their muscles. So we work from the spine out, from the central nervous system out, and then the Alexander technique teacher works on the spinal alignment and the torso and head, neck, shoulders, and then I work on the arms. So we just start with the simplest thing.
Yeah, awareness.
Controlling the lift of the forearm and releasing the fingers into gravity. So in other words, I teach them, we go downstairs, so to speak, to their fuse box or whatever, and teach them or breaker box, where the breakers are, what the signals are, how to control the signals, what signal, where the switch is to that light. They don't even know. And then once they understand where these switches are, then I stack it, one simple thing from the simplest to more and more complex. So the brain has time to get that new, what we call neuromuscular program. And it's laborious. You got to have a lot of patience. But man, it's just, I sit back often in the hall pre-pandemic and just weep when I see and hear them play. The results, it really drives me, my passion for this, to see what happens if they stay with it. I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people, not a lot, but in our field, there's certainly wonderful people out there doing great stuff. So I'm one of many.
Yeah, and do you note improved performance after all these changes as well?
Do I what?
Note any improved performance with the players as well?
Yeah. In fact, I just finished writing an article for the European Piano Teachers Journal on that very topic. They wanted me to write about the correlation between technique and musicianship. And I said, well, first we'd better define technique, because I don't mean inefficient, tight, accumulation of tension. That won't work. But yeah, when you are really in charge of the whole thing, you're sitting there, you're in command, you're phrasing, making beautiful shapes and sound, voicing, we call it. Your timing, the timing becomes much more natural. You can play really, really fast. You don't accumulate tension. You can do all sorts of little nuanced things. I'm talking classical music, but I've retrained jazz players too. I have one now. So he claims that it's helping tremendously. So no, the studies have shown, and the study of my own method at Columbia University showed that it was statistically really high power of a lot more musicality. Of course, you can be free as a bird physically, Brian, and dull as a brick musically. You've got to demand it of yourself. But yeah, it does have tremendously positive effects, and that's shown now.
Yeah.
And I hope there'll be a lot more studies of other people like me, or teachers with what we call anecdotal success in training injury-preventive, well-coordinated technique, and just study them. That's why I spent all that money and went back to get my doctorate a couple years ago. I wanted to make sure my knowledge was sound in science and pedagogy also, how I was teaching it. And then also, I just thought, I need to test my own method. Of course, I had to go through the institutional review board. I couldn't interview anybody. It all had to be farmed out. I paid lots of money to get all that done, so I protected my subjects, my
Right.
students. But we did it, and that I wanted to see, and I can tell you, sweat bullets for months when they were doing those interviews and surveys and stuff. I thought, my God, what
I can only
developed is
imagine.
actually causing injury. Yeah, injury-inducing technique. This method.
Yeah,
So
you came up with that technique long before you went back to school, right? To get your
Oh, yeah.
doctorate. So yeah, so that technique, how did you come up with it then? I mean, was it just years of practice and years of being
No.
with students?
Once again, there was some dumb luck, serendipity, and also a very inquiring, I've got intellectual curiosity, you might say. I got, as a little farm kid in North Carolina, I had a wonderful mother and father who supported me in what I wanted to do, but I played the piano from about 4 years old, little backcountry prodigy, you might say. And
Yeah.
but I got royally injured at 16 playing a Beethoven concerto with the Governor's School Orchestra. And I woke up one day and my right arm felt like it was going to fall off. It was burning, cold hands, numbness, all this, not numbness actually, just cold and lifeless. It just wouldn't work. It was terrifying to me, I can tell you that. I mean, this was a chance of a lifetime to play a concerto with an orchestra, and it was devastating. And Mama found some doctor down in the county who gave me a cortisone shot every day for a couple weeks. I know, Brian, both of you must be cringing.
I did
That
cringe.
might explain a lot about
No.
how
But that is typical. I mean, that is typical
Yeah.
the way you'll get treated. Yeah.
But nobody ever really told me what it was. These words that now my students know, they know the science, they know the terminology, they have to be accurate about it, but nobody even said this is tendonitis. Well, it was tendonitis. It was. I don't think it was tenosynovitis, it was tendonitis, but he wouldn't let me. I rested it for 2 weeks, and then I actually played. But I was haunted for the next 6 years in college. I would just be in the infirmary in the whirlpool. They didn't have treatments, fancy treatments, but then they did. Colleagues of mine, as I got older, they began to have they would clip nerves in the thumb, and each decade seems to have some trendy sort of thing, whether it's carpal tunnel syndrome,
wow.
or whether it's focal dystonia or whatever, thoracic outlet syndrome. So there were a lot of misdiagnoses. So I went to Amsterdam and to study and play and whatever, and just serendipitously found a great teacher, an American Jewish Russian woman who'd had a great background, and the first thing she said was, you have to be aware. Awareness was everything of the body. Mm-hmm. And by golly, she retrained me, not the way I retrain now. It was a little different, but she backed me out of that injury, and I was playing virtuoso stuff within a year. And the main thing was, it was quite simple. Brian, you'd get it. You don't accumulate tension in your arms or anywhere. You do not accumulate muscle contraction. You use it, and then you release it. Use it, release it, use it, release it. But you can't just say that to somebody intellectually. They have to be trained in that from the get-go. You can't ask a young skater to do a double axel when she hasn't even learned how to apply proper form in her, just skating forward and backward. You've got to build those things one on top of the other. And then finally, actually fast playing, you use something we call the ballistic principle, where you're in biomechanics, where you've got a propulsion, and you just, you really, you hit a note, and then you let the muscles release in the forearm, and they just glide through, and the fingers flutter. So it's the ultimate form of efficiency, but it's kind of the bedrock, that ballistic principle of the old Russian school, which was big virtuoso playing like Rachmaninoff. So I found her, but then I got another injury. I came back to America to visit. I played on some heavy actions, and I began to feel my whole arm felt cold. a doctor up in Massachusetts, where I was at the time, said, yeah, you need surgery. I thought, what? Surgery? What? It just was cold. And another one said, now cortisone, you're going to have cortisone shots, but it was just cold. Brian, you probably know why, if somebody has a cold arm, hello,
Yeah.
it's circulatory. And so,
Yeah.
so nobody said that. So I flew back to Amsterdam, called Mrs. Latiner. She said, oh my God, dear, call so-and-so. So I called the best physical therapist known to God and man at that point. Theodora de Lange was her name. She treated all the musicians, great and small, like me. She had me over at 11 o'clock that night. Don't do that, Brian. Don't be that selfish. Or Keoni, don't do that. But she did, and we worked until 1 or 2. And the first thing she did was something nobody had ever done when I had all these problems at the infirmary and with doctors from the 6, 7 years. She had an upright piano, and she said, go play for me, I'll watch you play.
Yeah.
So she watched my form.
Yeah.
And she said, you're hyperextended in your lower back. You're too loose. You're not supporting your arms properly with the arm muscles in the torso. And she gave me some, and she said, she didn't use the term core, Keoni, but she was saying the core muscles are not well developed.
Right.
And so everything was just too loose and unsupported, and I didn't have a good core, and I wasn't breathing well. So Mrs. Latiner had not really talked with me about the torso, head, neck, that alignment. The old Russian school really just basically worked on the loosening up the arm, you might say, and not accumulating tension. Because everybody back in 1900, they did sit upright. People didn't slump. We didn't start slumping till we started wearing jeans. 1960s. And so everyone started slumping, and now you see pianists slumping, like Schroeder. Well, Schroeder's problem is his piano's too small, but that's another thing. But he's got an ergonomic problem. But anyhow,
well, that plays a big role too, right? The ergonomics
that has
of
a
it.
huge role, yeah.
Yeah.
But so she did acupuncture, she did Swedish and Danish massage. She said, there's nothing wrong with your muscles, your tendons, or anything. You've cut off your arm. And she even asked me, and this was a big one too, have you been having a hard time emotionally lately? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I have, really. She said, well, you've cut your arm off. You've cut that part of your body that expresses itself the most. You've cut it off, and you're going to have to rejoin it. You're going to have to kind of hold it to you like a sick child and learn to love it more. And she started releasing, obviously. She said, you have a circulatory problem. And the acupuncture helped tremendously. And I flew back. I got on my bike at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I've never felt so light. And I started playing the next day. I backed into it, but there you have it, operations, cortisone, and none of it was on point. It was a circulatory problem that came about also playing on heavy instruments. Because women, most of us, I think the statistics are about 60% of pianists are playing on an instrument that's too large.
What do you mean by heavy and it's just too large?
Oh, yeah, well, heavy action is something that is, the keys go down, but you can have, and you can actually put nickels. There's a way you can figure out what the grams are. For instance, your average piano, back when I was playing on those heavy instruments, was about 55, even 60 grams down.
So it's the resistance of the keys?
Oh, God, yeah, it's the resistance. That's what it is. And Horowitz, the great Horowitz, actually, he had his keys, he had it regulated in such a way, it was like 33 grams. I play on an instrument now, this Hamburg Steinway, that's about, I'd say, 42, which is just fine for me. So it's the resistance. You've got that, and then you've also got, I'll show you, I don't know, I know you've got this is your standard keyboard. I'll show you. Because I'm a member of something called Pianists for Alternatively Sized Instruments. And the modern instrument had a, here it is. The standard instrument, it was standardized back in the 1900s to accommodate, Steinways in New York, to accommodate big, huge virtuoso hands like Rachmaninoff. He could reach a 12th, which is C to G. That's enormous. I have a hard time now reaching.
So that's a big, you're talking about a big, long finger reach, right?
Yeah, an extension of the fingers. And so it was that, you can see this is your, I think that, no, that's the smaller one. But the larger one is like this. So here's what my hand looks like on, you can see me.
Yeah,
Right.
I see that difference.
Trying to reach there. But now we're asking the profession to create instruments where if I put my hand down, that's my octave. And so you guys can see there I have a great arch. So I don't have to worry about it. And I have a lot of my students really needed an instrument this small with keys that small, like 5.5 inches or so. So we're really working hard worldwide with the piano industry to see if we can get people to come up with smaller instruments, because the playing field's not level. Women are definitely, we're out. I mean, we can try to play all this big stuff, and I always did, but I was overloading my joints and muscles, and even the great Vladimir Ashkenazy that was quoted as saying, great Russian pianist, one of the best, that he felt that the early onset of osteoarthritis in his hands was because he had smaller hands and played all that big romantic literature. And so he felt that, and I understand, because I've got arthritis. I mean, some of it's age related, but I know a lot of it's related to having put so much force through those hyperextended joints, and then also stretching, with the extensors, having to extend the fingers so much, loading them. It's really, we have to put a lot of force into the instrument to get these humongous, and huge sounds. So if we get big sound, it's because our body's producing it, not like an organ where you can just pull out a stop.
Right.
So, and women want to be competitive, but we're not. The playing field is definitely not level, and so we're trying to change that. But it's economics. I mean, people are used to the standard version.
That's fascinating. Like, I would have never thought to ask, is this, what size piano is this? Is this going to fit my hands and my posture and all that? Basically, the patriarchy is there in the pianist world also.
Yeah,
I mean, it's all geared towards them.
Yeah, it catered toward the big Russian virtuosi. Steinways wanted to accommodate them back then. Even there was one, Josef Hoffmann, who ordered a smaller piano at Steinways, and we have those specs. I mean, so they are making smaller instruments. Salem College, where I work, we've got two, a Steinway that's got a retrofitted action that's smaller, and I can tell you something. I've seen it happen when women, especially, who've struggled so much with injury, and who are wonderful musicians and have worked so hard to play that stuff. They sit down, they start playing, they start crying.
Oh yeah.
They realize it wasn't their problem.
Right.
No, it was the instrument. I mean, the piano is one of the few musical instruments that is not ergonomically, that we don't have choices. You don't, a little Suzuki violinist, my God, you don't ask a little 6-year-old to play on a standard size violin or a standard size cello. But the piano is such a humongous instrument. But they could make small digital keyboards for little kids. But if you think women have a problem, full-grown women with our small hands, think about little kids, stretching like that. And they will, and they're determined to do it, and they don't want to give in, because pianists tend to be very individual. They're very competitive. We have to be. I mean, if you missed 1 or 2 notes in a concert, one time in Italy, in an international competition, I missed, 3 notes or something. I knew I was out in the semifinals. I mean, so in other words, it's such a competitive thing if you're on that level of playing, if you get into the doctoral. But even if you're just an amateur loving life and enjoying it, who wants to feel uncomfortable? And it's the law of diminishing returns. If they don't have a good biomechanical background, then what's going to happen is it's going to get harder and harder. And as they work into more complex kinetic patterns, it's just going to be, they're going to get more and more frustrated. and then drop out. And they won't realize that it really had to do with training. It really had to do with establishing good biomechanical models and then informed means of teaching them step by step. I mean, it's solvable. It's not, good technique's not a talent. I mean, some people have, more athletic ability than others, but innately, more sense of their body. But I've never met a pianist yet I couldn't retrain who had the motivation to do it and to coordinate well. So
Well, it seems like they don't know to ask, though. Many of them don't know to ask, and many of them are going away with saying, wow, I need surgery, or I need to get my nerves clipped, or
right,
whatever.
And surgery is the absolute last option. And
yeah, because that seems like it's going to just inhibit you even more.
Well, and they're going to need to, we've got to work together. That's my solution, an interdisciplinary approach. We started it back in Denver in 2008 with a panel, someone in ergonomics, someone in somatic education, Alexander, somebody who was a sports pedagogue from the Olympic Training Center, somebody who was a performing arts medicine doctor, and technology. You can quantify all this stuff. Yeah, I could plug myself up, and I have little surface electromyography. You can put the electrodes on the surface and see the tension you're accumulating. So we're working on an app so that I can do that more distance learning with computers and various things like that, so that they can become aware of their muscles more. I mean, all of this is trainable, but we need a collective effort worldwide, really. But it needs to be an interdisciplinary thing with movement science and somatic education and neuroscience, neuropedagogy. I mean, this is the plasticity of the brain. How do you create these patterns, or in the injured pianist case, how do you repattern? And that's, I love neuroplasticity. It was like a revelation when I read Deutsch's book, The Brain That Changes Itself. Because
that's an excellent book.
That's what I've been doing all these years, is changing their program up there, and how it's very laborious, but it can work. But it's a skill. It's not a talent, and everybody has a right to it.
Right.
And I'll work the rest of my life, or until I take my last breath, I'm sure, trying to help people find joy in playing without pain.
Well, hopefully they find you too. I mean, I know you have people from all over the world seeking you out, but it's just like, how are they finding you? That's the issue. How do they know to find you?
They go on the internet, thank God, and they type in pain or injury, and but the problem is we've also got some bogus stuff. Listen, I'm not perfect, so I know I've said some things before from a biomechanical viewpoint that are specious. They're that's why I went back to school. I thought, I don't think that's right. I've got to make sure, I have the training. But there are a lot of people that we call it junk science, quasi-science, that are using scientific terminology.
Right.
But once again, it's sort of autodidactic, and they're developing their own little things that do work in some cases, but in other cases might not. But I don't know. We just need to get together more. I think collectively in ergonomics and in biomechanics and in all the complementary, sort of approaches too, and then look at the history of piano and technique and see what they did right back then.
Right. Right.
But there are solutions. There are solutions.
Does that collective in Denver have a name, Barbara?
Yeah, it was the Music Teachers National Association annual conference in 2008, and the title of the presentation was Enlightened Technique, I think, for the 21st century. Enlightened piano technique, meaning scientifically informed,
right?
Basically, So I think we can get it right. I really, really think we can get it right now. And the race, I'm very positive. The race is to these younger people. The internet, things are going out. It's exponential, and the younger generations are more and more interested in this from a rational viewpoint, and they don't think that it's mutually exclusive of great music making. Not at all, So and I tell people also, they'll see pianists like Lang Lang, like I said, fiendishly talented, a wonderful talent, but doing all sorts of odd things with his body, and they're going, well, he doesn't get injured. Well, actually he did, but I don't know what it was, and I certainly wish him the very best. But they're going, well, why does so-and-so play like this and they're world famous? And I'm saying, well, why aren't they injured? And I said, well, you know, not everybody who smokes a pack of cigarettes a day is going to get lung cancer.
Right.
But I sure as heck wouldn't give a bunch of cigarettes to anybody I loved.
Right.
Because the
Right.
probabilities are very high that if you break those rules of good biomechanics and good body use, you're probably going to get injured if you're serious about it and practice.
Yeah, you're more likely to have poor quality of play too later on, or
That's
your life
it.
of playing will be shortened significantly, I would think, right?
Right, right.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, that's the problem.
yeah. So you brought up the interdisciplinary approach. So I know I've gotten some referrals from you, but who do you else what other practitioners do you use outside of the artistic world, so to speak?
Well, I try to get a list, worldwide actually, but especially in the United States, of good orthopedists who understand,
Yeah.
how pianists need to operate, not how most of them do, but how they need to use their bodies. Neurologists, really important. But inevitably, when they come back with all the tests were negative. I mean, that's,
Yeah,
uh,
you hear that a lot,
yeah,
I'm sure,
right.
right?
Because it's gotten complex. Of course, physical therapists, Brian, you guys are, to me, you're sort of almost the first line of defense.
Yeah.
A really great physical therapist can knows the body so well and can pinpoint, misuse like this. You understand good biomechanics and good body use, and so you do the measurements, you can pinpoint it, you can see hypermobility. So I have a couple of great physical therapists here in town that they're my go-to. They're in
Yeah.
for me, for maintenance, but for my students. And then of course acupuncture. I
Mm.
totally believe in that. You got to get the whole system in balance. Also, recently, one of my, and they also, listen, they'll go to alternative massage therapy. That's not alternative, but energy work, Reiki. I mean, it's all individualized in terms of
Right.
my training.
Hmm.
But recently, hypermobility became really big. So there was a sports medicine doctor who uses prolotherapy, an
Hmm.
injection. Brian, you guys know that.
Yeah.
Um, to kind of get the ligaments to harden up again and create that inflammation syndrome, and then they tighten up. And I've had tragic cases of ongoing, decades-long hypermobility where one fellow was told he just needed to see a psychiatrist, when in fact
Mm.
he had hypermobility of his shoulders, of his elbow, of his everything,
Mm.
hypermobility of the spine. I have a student now who's got serious hypermobility of the spine. So, and then all the sort of ancillary things that come with it too. But the latest one, Keoni, you and I know this person, uh, it takes a village, and the Mayo Clinic understands
Yeah.
that principle.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
they're,
Yeah.
they're great. And so he finally, I sent him to everybody I could, and nobody could come up with it. He was in terrible pain all the time. He couldn't pick up a piece of paper. And
Yeah.
so it was diagnosed as central sensitization. And
And
one
what's the treatment for that? How did they go about like breaking that
interestingly,
cycle?
interestingly, the treatment is not going back to any doctors or even acupuncture or anything. In
Yeah.
other words, it's the brain has gotten sort of this pain syndrome, the cycle has gotten lodged in the brain, and it just can't stop, even when there's no mechanical reason that would cause the pain.
So you're
And
basically running those neural pathways, those
you
neural
got it.
pain pathways
Right.
over and over
So
again.
what they're trying to do, and I'm saying this probably not that accurately, but people can look up central sensitization. They're trying to shrink that part of the brain that is taken up with the pain. So the first thing they tell them is no pain talk. In other words,
Yeah.
that old thing of where your thoughts go, that's where you are. Well, I couldn't even ask him, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Nope,
Right.
can't do that. Because it'll put his brain back into that loop. And then
That's fascinating.
it's behavioral change. It's basically behavioral change to have a routine, to train yourself how to, it sounds like almost distracting yourself and using your cortical real estate for other things that you're really, really interested in, that you're doing, and you're not going to talk about the pain. You're not going to go there. But that's the hardest. And focal dystonia even I can work with. But by golly, this is something, it's new. And I know of the brain that changes itself, and also the brain's way of healing. They talk about
Yeah.
someone who actually doesn't believe in pain management. The doctor they're talking about who's on the cutting edge, he believes in shrinking that part of the brain that's taken up with that pain.
Yeah.
So that's the newest, and the latest. It's unending, Keoni. Like you and Brian know, it's just, and Keoni, you've been doing this for so long and seen so many different things. But
Well, Barbara, that's fascinating. When I hear stuff like that, though, I always think, well, okay, so you've been running these pathways in your I don't know, cortex. You're running these pathways over and over again, or the pain pathways over and over again. It's like to break that cycle is extremely hard. I mean, I picture a pianist playing, and they at least have it in their mind how they should be, how their posture should be, to release the pain. And as soon as they get into the piece, I could imagine them going right back into their old mode of doing things, right? Because there's so much going on that I don't know how you just can concentrate on all of that. And then how do you break those pathways that have been running for 20 years or more?
yeah, I got you. You froze a minute. I got you.
Oh,
You're back.
okay.
So you were saying, and as soon as they get into the piece, the pain starts coming back?
Well, it just seems to me like once they start playing a piece, it seems like they would default right back into their old ways.
The old program?
The old program is starting to run again. And how do you break that cycle with the old program? Like, with the case you were just talking about, how long did that take for this particular person to break that cycle?
Well, his biomechanics, by the way, are terrific. So in
Okay.
other words, even when you retrain, which all my other students do, they retrain this neuromuscular program from, they train so rigorously that by the time they get back to an old piece, they don't have the old program. It doesn't go into what we call automaticity. It's gone. It's wiped out. They haven't used that program.
How long does that take, Barbara?
It can take a year to two.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it varies.
And that's constant practice, right? I mean, it's just going over.
Guided practice, not
Guided
the paradigm of, hey, I take my lesson a week. I'm seeing them a couple times a week. My assistants are seeing them every day. They are. It's like sports. I mean, it's training every day.
Yeah.
They have to be. And then they send me little videos on their iPhone. I send them for the simplest coordinations and all that. Is this right? What's going on? And so it's called immersive training. We do it that way. So it takes, I'd say they've really, like in my intensive training week, after 40 hours of that, they were already kind of body washed, you might say, and brainwashed into a whole new way of thinking and sensing their bodies. But then to actually get back to their really, like you saw some of my students play, that really high level stuff, really complicated stuff. It took her about 7 months.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Of rigorous and they work together in groups too, like that group mentality, like at gym. They're motivated, they help each other, they watch each other, and they're doing it in a very rational way. And then eventually, once they download that program, it is dangerous when they begin, though, too soon to get back into music making, because when they hear those emotions and the sound, they can revert in the first year. I have to be very careful, until the program takes. Now I can play anything, and I don't even remember how it hurt. I don't remember a thing about it.
Right.
It's gone.
You have a new program that
It's all the other one, I don't even know where it is. I mean, so it's gone. Use it or lose it.
Hey,
So
Barbara, I know we're almost out of time, but I had another question because, so when all I know about pianists and athletes for that matter, there's this whole concept of more is better. The more I play, the better I'll get. The more I play, the better I get. And so is there a recommended time of playing before you should take a rest? And what are the rest playing cycles that you recommend? And I guess it's individual, but when I hear 4 hours of playing, in my mind, I'm thinking, are they seriously on a piano for 4 straight hours, and can they lose themselves in it for that long, or 8 hours without resting?
Well, you really hit on one of the big things, because the first thing they have to do is get a timer or their iPhone or something. And I have them, when they're retraining, it's like every 5 to 10 minutes. They've got to just, the brain gets tired. But 20 minutes, I believe, is in the research, 20 minutes is the brain just starts getting fatigued and you can't focus anymore. So if your brain and your awareness, your kinesthetic awareness is not there and your attention is not there, it's about attention, you shouldn't be doing it. So my students, it's like 20 minutes, then 5 minutes off, rest the brain.
Yeah.
That's in neuroscience. Most of what I teach is based in neuroscience. It's called neuropedagogy. And so we know that the brain needs that it needs to have that rest. Also, there's offline learning, so that even if they're not playing, if they've done their practice well for 20 minutes, the brain is, especially like when they're sleeping at night, that's so important, because the brain is doing offline learning and downloading things, integrating, synthesizing. So they're actually practicing then in their sleep in a good way. They're
Right.
downloading everything. So I'd say 20 minutes, but they also are very self-aware. And most pianists that, when they first come to me, they're not aware of their bodies at all that way. But when I do workshops, and I can only work with people a couple hours, in these teachers' organizations, we do work on some kinesthetic awareness, tuning up, alignment, all of that. But then, I say, okay, let's just close our eyes and tighten every muscle in your arm, and then let's release it. And they can pick up that pretty quickly. And then I say in master classes, okay, even if you don't have this yet, or this form, and you don't understand it yet, what you can do is play that passage, play 4 measures, stop, put your hands in your lap, close your eyes, tune into your breathing, and scan your muscles and release everything. At least that way, if they practice that way with those breaks, they won't accumulate tension, which is the main culprit. But my students, if you walk past them, you're going to hear a lot of silence.
Yeah.
A lot of silence, because they're practicing, but they're mentally practicing.
Right.
And that's neuroscience. That is so, you can lay down practically the same neuronal pathways
By mentally doing it.
by envisioning it than you would if you actually did it. And that way you don't get in trouble. So you'll hear them in silence for like 15 seconds going through 4 measures. And then they play it, and it's inevitably much better.
That's fascinating.
It's just amazing. I love neuroscience. I've learned so much from it, and it also has corroborated some of the stuff that I kind of came up with intuitively. And I ditched some things that I was doing that didn't work. Like, they need rest. They really, they need to, but you know what? We want to get the emotional kick. That's what I said at the beginning. I wanted to keep playing because I was getting a high, that reward system, from hearing these beautiful sounds.
Right.
So don't tell me to stop every
Right.
10
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah. I know you can lose yourself. I know artists are the worst with that. They just get in this mode. I think we all know what that feels like, where you get in the zone, and before you know it, hours have gone by, and you've been in this position where you totally lost sense of where your body is. And then, injuries can happen.
I bet your I know as a visual artist, the only thing that alerts me that I've been standing in front of the easel painting too long is I get nauseated. I may have been there 3 hours, and suddenly I feel like I'm going to throw up. Well, my body finally is going, for goodness sake, stop.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that rest is so important for athletes, for artists, for anybody. You need that rest. I mean, being stuck in a position over a computer for hours is a problem, So
well, all of this stuff could be taught. I think Microsoft, all the great computer companies need to have these programs. They need to have, I shouldn't be saying this because I could make $1 billion from it, but they need to build into their computers this beautiful sort of Zen bell, ding. every
Yeah.
5 minutes, and then with the ding, it's like Calm,
Yeah.
that thing where it goes, what? Do nothing for 15 seconds. So you just watch this thing and you just release your muscles, and some lovely voice comes on and says, watch your breathing, release your
Or
and
yells at them, get the
I,
hell up out of your seat and go walk around. Yeah. Yeah.
right.
Wow.
Guys, you've been great. I have talked too much. I know I have, but this is a passion for me. I mean, I can't bear it to see people
Well,
suffer.
no, we hear it. I just,
Yeah.
what, before we breaks, I mean, before we get off, so Barbara, what is the best way that people can find you? I mean, is it really that they just have to, they have to look, but I mean, where can they find you? What's the
Well,
easiest way?
if they type in my name, they're going to come up to the Lister Sync Institute website and the TED Talk and everything. I've got quite a presence on the internet, and a
Yeah, and
lot of
all the pianists that I know of, and I don't know that many, but certainly the ones in the area are all around here know who you are and stuff. But it's like I just know that people are finding you. You have people from all
oh, yeah,
over the world finding you. It's
yeah.
just
They do. I mean, it's not that hard anymore because my present. I guess that's the one advantage of getting quite a bit older. That especially with the internet. And I've been at this. I had a website back in the late '90s, one of the first. And Freeing the Caged Bird. It's just in Russia alone, it has one segment has over 80,000 views. So
that's great.
hundreds
That's
of
cool.
thousands. So it's out there. But you're kind to say that. I would say that on my website I also list and we're updating it a bit, health resources, other people who are doing work like this. We have a Lister Sync Foundation. I'm always welcoming gifts to help pianists who've lost their scholarships or whatever to get training. So the foundation was set up years ago in my name to help people who are in trouble, pianists in trouble. But there is definitely, I've got presence there, and there are articles, and I haven't written a book yet because I've often said that you can't really describe the smell of a rose, and you
Right.
can't describe the sensations we're trying to teach of this good coordination. And my dad used to just laugh at me when I'd give him golf books, and he claimed that when he'd read Ben Hogan or Jack Nicklaus or what, they were great pedagogues. They knew how to teach golf, but he said, you just messed up my swing. I had a perfectly good swing before I read your book. So
Yeah.
that's why I just
Yeah.
talk to people about the problem like this, but I wouldn't for a minute. That DVD of mine, it's not for training, it's for information to go get training. But
Yeah.
we're going to create an app. I actually think now that we can teach more virtually now
Yeah.
with technology than I ever thought possible, that I can teach them to sense their muscles and the degree of contraction and all that from afar with the new technology. So we're
Yeah.
creating an app now that's going to come out within the year.
That's great. Well, hopefully these people find you before they're,
Well,
surgically altered
I'll,
or anything like that.
I'm not selfish about it. Well, that's why I'm training teachers. That's why we created this master's program. I want to train teachers to teach this,
Yeah.
and not wait until people
And take it with them so they can.
Yeah, and that's what they're doing. It should be embedded in every college, graduate piano pedagogy program. And this was about 5 or 6 years ago. One of my peers, one of my colleagues, fellow students at Columbia, her dissertation, she interviewed and surveyed graduate piano pedagogy. That's what it's called. Learning people, teaching people how to teach piano pedagogy graduate courses, and of the big ones in the curriculum, she couldn't find one of them that had even one course in technique.
Wow, that's crazy.
Wow, it's crazy. They had it in how to
Yeah.
read music and methods and what repertory and all that stuff, and great stuff, great, well-known programs, but they didn't have any course, not even a course in technique. But now I think that's changing. I wouldn't for a minute want to put on this podcast that it's not changing. That was 5 or 6 years ago, and I need to this summer catch up on some of the latest research. But I know there's
That's great.
really
Well,
good
good it's
colleagues out
changing.
there.
Yeah, it's great that it is changing.
You
Well,
want me to
Barbara,
play? Can I play something for you before?
I would love that, actually. That'd be a gift, yes.
So you can see how the biomechanics, this is actually at the TED Talk I started with this, but I'll just play you something. And you can see how this works. Your radio, your podcast audio audience won't hear it, but you'll see a little bit about the biomechanics of it. And by the way, benches are everything. I have a bench that's hydraulic and it's fantastic. Just with the smallest touch, the thing goes down and up. I mean, it's great.
It's great.
Yeah, but most pianists are sold without an adjustable bench, and that's a problem too.
Yeah.
All right, this is a great Chopin prelude. With a see, you asked me if I warm up. Well, I haven't warmed up. I've been warming up thinking about it. So here goes. Good old show. You can see why this is such a hard sell. What is that? Pure emotion, pure passion, pure joy. Who
Pure
wants
beauty.
to talk about biomechanics when you can get
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, I get it. But you got to talk about it to get to be able to
able to
put
sit
that
down.
out there in the universe.
I don't feel anything when I play that. It's well prepared. I feel nothing but pure joy physically also when I play it. I'm more warmed up when I finish than when I started. So
Yeah, definitely became one with that piano
You got
as
it.
soon as you touched it.
Well, thank you for
It's my
bringing it
best-
to us, Barbara.
Keoni, it's my best and oldest friend. You're a good friend, but this is your
Yeah, I know I can never take place of the piano. I know that. That's
right.
great. Well, we have to, Brian, we have to make an announcement or at least put it in the show notes you got to watch the whole podcast.
Yeah,
You gotta
yeah.
wait till
Check
the
it out
end.
on YouTube. Absolutely.
Yeah.
God, no.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that to the podcast and sharing that.
Yeah.
Oh, Brian,
Sure.
I'm so sorry I didn't hear your beautiful radio voice though more because I was talking too much. But I hear all your other podcasts. I listen to all of them. So
Well, thank you. And
guys are
thank you for
great.
bringing that passion to our podcast. I think it'll help
Yeah.
a lot of people. And hopefully we can disseminate some of that information that you brought to us. Because
and I'm not, like I said, I'm not the only one doing this. There are a lot of great people who are doing a wonderful job, and I support them fully,
Well, thank you, Barbara. Let's train